Development Agency for the District of Columbia. It has a vast array of programs and services that are available to both employees and job seekers. DOES administers the district's First Source program, which ensures that district residents benefit from new jobs created by municipal funding. It was established in 1984, and the law was revised in 2011. The First Source program requires that district residents account for at least 51% of all new hires on projects or contracts receiving over $300,000 in government assistance. Additionally, the First Source program requires that construction projects receiving more than $5 million from the district government employ a minimum percentage of DC residents in specific jobs. District residents must work at least 20% of the journey worker hours, 60% of the apprentice hours, 51% of skilled labor hours, and 70% of common labor hours. Through the Office of First Source Compliance and the Office of Talent and Client Services, these two offices maintain a First Source registry of unemployed district residents and available residents. The agency refers candidates from the register for interviews with employers subject to First Source employment agreements and monitors projects and contracts for compliance. Importantly, the First Source program is one of the district's most important tools for reducing unemployment and providing district residents with high-quality jobs. It is essential to ensuring that the investments that we make in our city are truly benefiting our community. Today, we will discuss the details of this program so that the public may better understand how it supports our local workforce. I also look forward to hearing from members of the public, those especially involved in the construction trades, about how we can improve the effectiveness and the impact of the First Source program. With that said, I'd like to start with our public witnesses. I think we have 3 that have signed up. And as I call you forward, if you would take one of the seats at the witness table, and we'll be ready to get your testimony. Larry Greenhill Jr. and Andrew Dollison. That would be fine with me. And of course, Attorney Eric Teresa. Always good to see you, sir.
Hello? Okay.
And you can begin, Mr. Greenhill, when you're ready.
Check. All right, thank you. Good morning, Councilwoman Barnes. We want to thank you for your leadership with organizing your public roundtable and giving the voiceless the opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Larry Greenhill Jr. I'm the Director of Construction Services of Charles Mann Contracting, LLC, along with Charles and Serena Mann. I'm here to provide public testimony about the financial harms caused to construction CBEs, construction business enterprises, CBEs, and DC resident journey workers of all construction, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing trades by the Department of Employment Services awarding alternative workforce plans to construction general contractors and land developers. Also, I am here in support of our construction CBE business partner, Mr. Leroy Robinson of Robinson's LLC. And I apologize for the mix-up on the sign-up sheet. I think, I might have put Robinson's down there. I want to begin by stating that DOES should immediately stop awarding to general contractors and land developers, ADPs, Again, DOES should immediately stop awarding alternative workforce plans to general contractors and land developers. Councilwoman Bonds, as we specifically detailed and discussed with you on Monday, September 18th, 2023, about the Edgewood Apartments construction project in Ward 5, Northeast Washington, D.C., by DOES allowing AWPs on district government assisted construction projects receiving district government assistance totaling $5 million or more, DOES has allowed the general contractor and developer to bypass the required 20% DC journey workers hours that you just mentioned within the Workforce Intermediary Establishment and Reform of First Source Amendment Act of 2011, which going forward I will refer to as New First Source Act of 2011, for the duration of that Edgewood construction project. Councilwoman Bonds, we can speak very personally about the New First Source Act of 2011, 20% DC journey worker MEP requirements, because we were literally the unemployed DC journey workers complaining to DOES about the original First Source Act of 1984 during the time DOES was located on H Street. That's how far back this goes. After being told years ago about the 51% new hire loophole in the First Source Act of 1984, we decided to take our unemployed DC resident electrical journey workers to the Wilson building right here and bring our unemployment to the immediate attention of then Mayor Vincent Gray, and rest in peace, Marion Berry, Mayor for Life, along with the other DC council members about our unemployment. Back then, we were broke, unemployed, running out of DOES employment money, while still coming to this Wilson building every day trying to strengthen and amend the old First Source Act that, rest in peace, Marion Berry created for us all. Please understand the political advocacy and public testimony of unemployed DC journey workers back then helped create the 20% DC journey worker threshold of the New First Source Act of 2011. Councilwoman Bonds, the terrible irony is that with this saga is that 12 years ago, unemployed DC journey workers started off at DOES, helped create the New First Source Act of 2011, and now we are again being financially harmed by AWPs being awarded by DOES, which is the same district government agency that's meant to protect DC journey workers, as well as to some degree, CBEs, and enforce the New First Source Act of 2011. I know the time is limited, and I'm open to answer any questions, provide any more in-depth details about AWPs that do not work for DC residents, and support any solutions which will stop the financial harm to DC journey workers and construction CBEs by DOES awarding AWPs to general contractors and land developers. Thank you so much for your leadership and support.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Robinson, we'll take your testimony.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Leroy Robinson.
There you go.
Leroy Robinson, Ward 8, electrical contractor, CBE, 503 boys. So I just wanted to talk about the alternative workforce, but I'm just going to talk about specifically on a contract at Edgewood 4 and Edgewood 2. I put in that bid, Edgewood 2 for $487,000, Edgewood 4 for $5,523,000, rounded off. They didn't tell me that they was already getting the alternative workforce plan, but I bid it on a project before. They said they couldn't find the CBEs. They gave it to a contractor from Gaithersburg, Maryland. First on the call, they said that we was $27,000 more. That's why they didn't give it to us. And then we followed up And then they switched it to $57,000. So I just have a concern with that on bidding on these projects when they didn't originally plan to use local businesses. And also, we don't need other companies to hire DC residents. If they hire the CBEs, we live in a community, so we can hire the DC residents. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robinson, for your testimony. Mr. Teresa?
Hi, thank you. My name is Ari Teresa, and I'm an attorney that operates primarily in Ward 8, but also in other areas of the city. I was contacted by Mr. Greenhill and Mr. Robinson about some contracts that they had applied for, didn't get. Mr. Robinson spoke some about it. And they're not the first people that I have called me about this kind of issue. I'm in contact with a lot of contractors in Ward 8, a lot of CBE businesses, and it's a lot of the same, that they're not getting contracts that they qualify for. And there's some shenanigans with how they got denied. And through talking with them, I learned some more about the First Source program and also this alternative work source program, which effectively is a loophole so developers can get around hiring journeymen like Mr. Robinson and Mr. Greenhill, and in the alternative, hire people who are, I guess, lower on the totem pole in terms of their advancement in the trades, and offer them an apprenticeship, which, to my understanding, just became a paid endeavor. So it's not always a situation where they're taking this course for several weeks at a time. They're being paid. And then also, kind of piggybacking on what Mr. Greenhill said, this kind of loophole where, if they're not able to find CBEs, I guess that's the question, is like, how is it possible they're not able to find people to fill these roles and then to trigger the alternative work source when there are people who are here, right here? They're not like a figment of our imagination. We understand that there are CBEs that are looking for these jobs, and these positions are qualified for them, are scaled for it, but do not get it, and then they're able to leapfrog that and go through these apprenticeship programs. And I think the second part of it is, the effectiveness of these apprenticeship programs. You have Mr. Greenhill and Mr. Robinson, who, like you said, they're part of the community, and they're able to connect with people who would even, be interested in this kind of field in a way that, these developers who have utilized this loophole are unable to, and might actually be able to see them through the program, and make them be more successful in that endeavor. And I don't know what the success rate of that is, the alternative work source program is, as it's currently constructed. But, just, from talking to people, my understanding is that, when they're not being paid for these courses for weeks at a time, a lot of people lose interest. They may have an interest in being an electrical worker, but the way that it works is they have to come in and, do kind of like general labor. And so whatever interest they had maybe in this skilled field goes away as they have to spend months as a general laborer. And like, these are all kinds of things that could be wiped out if we were just hiring CBEs directly. They would be able to work with these people and better integrate them into these kinds of positions and fields that could be fruitful and very useful. So I just want to add that. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify. Like I said, Mr. Greenhill and Mr. Robinson are not unusual. I am always getting queries like this.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the panel. I do have a few questions for you, making sure that I understand what's going on. Mr. Teresa, you are talking about, have we examined the success of the alternative process? I don't have the answer for that today, but we will examine that issue with the director of DOAS. You know, she will be joining us follow up. In fact, she's here, but she'll be joining us later at the witness table. So I think that's very important to have a sense of how that works. But if I'm not mistaken, what I'm hearing is that there is a job. District government has advertised for a construction company to perform the task. In performing the task, they have to, as I call it, gas up with their workers. Who's going to do, you know, whatever the various trades are. And so am I hearing that in that process, they, in order to be compliant with the several different laws that we have, that they may decide that let's hire local residents, and we'll hire local residents at the sort of like entry level and train them. Of course, first you have to learn how to be on a construction site, right? So that means you push the broom, you clean up and do that. Okay, eventually you get to maybe learning a skill. But that's far cheaper to the contractor than if they were to look into the world of journeyman. Did I hear that? Is that what I'm hearing, Mr. Greenhill?
Kind of, sort of.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Help me understand.
Yeah. So from a journey worker's perspective, with the Edgewood Apartments, let's take that specifically.
All right.
Okay. So Mr. Robinson got an ITB from DSLBD, okay, for the Edgewood Apartments. Particular general contractor had that project, and they're working with the developer, Enterprise Community Development, right? Once that ITB goes out and we respond, Mr. Robinson and I, we respond, then they have to engage us because we're the local CBE, okay? They asked us to submit a bid, of course, right? Well, getting to what Mr. Robinson is saying, we already carry DC resident journey workers. We already employ DC resident electrical apprentices. When we submitted that number, the particular general contractor there was, wow, this is a great number. But what we found afterwards, this is part of the game, they never really intended to use us at that project because they had already had an alternative workforce plan in place where they were going to use an electrical contractor from Gaithersburg, Maryland, because their number is lower, Councilwoman, because, I mean, their estimate, their proposal, their winning proposal was lower, but that's because they don't carry any DC resident electrical journey workers. So with that being said, the alternative workforce plan that DOES allows in that workforce plan for them to train 30, as Mr. Teresa said, 30 local residents, 20, whatever local residents from the community as common laborers, right? Okay. With the hope that they go through this 10-week course or whatever course and become electrical apprentices. Okay. So basically what we're saying is that the developer and the general contractor, unfortunately, and I'm not saying this is intentional, along with DOES, them coming to DOES saying that supposedly we can't find any CBEs. We can't find any DC residents. That's a lie. That's not the truth because we just bid on that project. Okay. But DOES and the CBE office, for some reason, they're not connecting the dots as far as us being out here, CBEs being out here, DC journey workers being out here, DC electrical apprentices, DC residents from the community that are already electrical apprentices that are ready and able to work. The dots are not being connected. And I called and I've emailed DOES about this multiple times just for a sit-down meeting. So I want to thank you for organizing this. So hopefully some fruitful production can come out of this because we're being financially harmed, Councilwoman. We're being financially harmed, and the local people that, you know, Mr. Teresa said, I already know the retention rate. I'm waiting to hear what the retention rate is from DOES because I already have people from these alternative workforce programs that come to me and Mr. Robinson looking for work after they've been through a 10-week alternative workforce plan. Does that make sense? I'm just asking. When you could have, not you per se, but when the contractor, the general contractor and the developer, like Mr. Teresa said, and like Mr. Robinson said, could have easily worked with us. We had a fair number. We already had DC journey workers. So now, in closing, that's a $37 million project at Edgewood. And because of an alternative workforce plan, unfortunately awarded by DOES, there will be no DC journey workers. What does that mean? That means lost taxable revenue for the District of Columbia. Now, how does that make sense, Councilwoman? So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much, you know, for your response. You're telling me that the 20% requirement of journey worker hours would not be fulfilled if the alternative work plan becomes applicable. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm exactly saying. And we watched it right now at Edgewood. There are no DC journey workers at Daniel Steinman Electric. They're coming from Gaithersburg. I know they're not DC residents.
All right. And so I go back to my initial premise, and that is that we have a law that is set up to give DC residents an opportunity for employment. This first source goes even further. And it is stipulating that those who are already in the trade, who have the skill set, that they should be also a part of these programs. But it sounds like what I'm hearing is that if I'm a contractor, major contractor, I'm thinking about the dollar. And I'm thinking about how I can save money. And since we have so many laws in the District of Columbia, you know, this is an opportunity for me to use one of the laws that works in my financial benefit, not necessarily helps the community that my project will be in per se. And so this really is concerning. You know, it's like first source bumps up against, you know, anything else that we say that we're trying to do, and that is to get DC residents employed. and in an occupation where they can earn a fair wage. So we really want to look at that and look at the usefulness of the first source law, and particularly in the application. Because if I were a DOES and in the first source office, and if I get a plan that where they say, well, I haven't found anyone, yes, but I am more than willing to hire DC residents, it does sound like it should be a go. But then the question becomes, what happens to skilled labor that we have that resides in the district? How is that body of individuals treated? And when will they get their opportunity to perform and to also earn a living? So that's why I was concerned about and wanted to hear this. Now, help me understand how it is that the company already, the contractor already had received an alternative work plan approval through DOES before they made contact with you. Help me understand.
So, yeah, so that's one of my questions that I had for the meeting setup with Director Hughes. At what point, it's one of several questions, and I think I sent that to you. At what point in this bid process did the general contractor say that they don't want to use a local CBE, and then they want to use an alternative workforce plan? All I can say, kind of to answer your question, is that paperwork, the whole setup, reaching out to the community, finding out where they're going to train local residents, doesn't happen overnight. All right. It has to take some preconceived thought. And what I'm saying, Councilwoman, is when a particular general contractor gets a project like Edgewood, they've already won the project with pricing from their go-to subcontractors. So they already know the numbers. The developer awarded it to the GC because they know the numbers. So what I'm saying, and I've been explaining to Mr. Teresa, is that it's some shadiness going on when we bid the project, submit a fair number, and then in the 11th hour, we're told that, hey, you guys are right there. We like your number. The GC calling Mr. Robinson at 7:30 at night. Are you sure you guys are good with this number? Well, if we don't get you on the Edgewood, the tall one, we'll get you on the small one, the Gardens, right? Then to turn around and say no, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, an alternative workforce plan pops up with 50-something pages of detail. So I'm like you. I'm wondering at what point of the process, and that was one of my questions, was the alternative workforce plan discussed? Was it discussed before we turned in a bid? Was it discussed after we turned in a bid with DOES and the subcontract and the general contractor? Because they're the ones signing it. DOES, the general contractor, and the developer all work together with this alternative workforce plan that usurps the 20% journey worker requirement.
All right. Well, you of course are sharing with us your opinion. I just want that to be clear.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, we will be examining that most definitely. Mr. Teresa, you look like you have a comment.
Yeah, I was going to add that Mr. Greenhill spoke a little bit to it, but what it seems like is happening is if you're a DC company, right, and you hire DC journey workers, your contract's going to come in higher than a Maryland company because the rate of DC journey workers is higher than the rate of Maryland workers. So in that way, this bill is kind of undercutting itself, right? And then also with the whole issue of retention to people who actually come through this alternative work source plan. Like I haven't seen the numbers. I don't know what they're going to say. I've spoken to a lot of people, but there's no way you can convince me that some people just starting out in the field are better off under Red Brick, for example, than Mr. Greenhill or Mr. Robinson. So, I mean, it's not like it's an either or scenario. It's not like we're pitting DC Journey workers against DC people trying to get into the field. They're actually better off coming in under DC company with folks that understand their exigencies and can help them through the profession and the field.
All right, well, I hear you, and that is exactly what I'm seeing, that it's, you know, the goal is to have DC residents involved in these jobs. The question becomes, do they start at entry level? Or do we utilize some who are already in the trade and are established? And so that's why I'm saying we have laws that are, you know, pitted against each other and are naturally utilized in the world of commerce. That's the way it works. And I think it's time to examine these laws, because it shouldn't be, oh, either or. It should be, how do we do both and do it in a very distinct manner? But thank you so much. We're gonna keep this going today, and thank you. I understand that we have ABC Metro here. Mr. Ben Young, you are from the contracting world. You want to testify at this time? All righty, thank you. All right, you can proceed when you're ready, sir. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And Labor. My name is Ben Young, and I'm testifying on behalf of the ABC Metro Washington, the preeminent voice for construction in the District of Columbia. Before I begin, I want to commend the dedicated professionals at DOS for their work towards our shared goal of creating opportunity for district residents. Through no fault of DOS, and I want to stress that, first source compliance is currently a nightmare for construction firms in the city. The hiring thresholds, particularly for skilled labor, are nearly impossible to achieve in today's marketplace for labor. Consider that the unemployment rates in the district at the close of 1983 and 2011, when the program was first implemented and when it was last amended, were 8.5% and 9.9% respectively. That's roughly double the unemployment rate of 4.5% and nearly triple the unemployment rate for construction workers, which stands at around 3%. The first source law and its last major revision were literally enacted during a different era. In today's labor market for construction, it can be impossible to locate and hire enough district resident workers to meet the first source thresholds. This is especially true for skilled labor. This leaves firms in an impossible position. For nearly all construction firms that operate in the district, the difficulty of complying with first source, coupled with the threat of reportable penalties, keeps them from working on district-assisted projects. It's simply not worth the hassle. This reduces competition and leads to greater costs for district taxpayers. And anecdotally, we believe that first source projects can cost the district as much as 25 to 30% more than non-first source projects of similar size and scale. Fortunately, the current first source law permits the mayor to enter into special workforce training or placement arrangements with DOES. And I also want to stress that the word alternative is a bit misleading. It is currently part of the first source law. It is the first source law. In recent years, DOS has begun taking advantage of this provision to great success in the partnership with ABC's Construction Orientation Readiness Program called CORE. CORE has been in operation since 2008 and recently expanded to 10 weeks, offering more valuable pre-employment training demanded by the construction industry. Participants are workers with the basic knowledge, and skills needed for employment in the construction industry. The core program includes specialized instruction in the following areas: enhanced safety instruction, construction math, hand power tool operation, introduction to blueprint reading, employability skills, communication skills, and material handling. While the current first source law permits companies to use special workforce training arrangements in lieu of the hiring and hours worked requirements, there is no certainty in this option, which again is already part of the law. There's no certainty that it will be available to them or what the specific requirements of the arrangement will be, if so. That's because the current language stipulates that the mayor may authorize these arrangements, but does not require her to do so if a company opts to meet the first source requirements in this manner. We believe that the law should be amended to provide certainty by changing the may to shall. Next, we urge the council or DOES to standardize the requirements of these agreements so that companies have certainty as to what will be required of them before selecting this option. This will also create efficiencies within DOES. The first source law does not include minimum requirements or any requirements for special workforce training or placement arrangements. As a result, each new arrangement requires significant back and forth negotiations, and agreements can be different from project to project or company to company. These simple fixes to the current law will benefit many district residents, including those who are hard to employ and are most in need of basic employment skills. In closing, I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for the seriousness with which you take these issues. I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Young. I'm back to my original point that we're kind of stuck here with the law that we have on the books. And we see from the community of workers that maybe this law does not work the way it was originally intended. Times have changed. So I appreciate getting your feedback on this.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we please remind you to send your testimony in writing, everyone? It is so we can make it a part of the record. Otherwise, we only have the tape and we really like to have the written word. We're still, in the dark ages where the written word is important as well. So thank you very much for your testimony to our public witnesses. And now I guess we are able to bring on our director. I want to thank you all for your testimony today. Yes, sir. I'll repeat. It is, if you can send it by email, or you have the option always to bring it down to the Wilson Building. And the office number is room 116, just on the other side of this room. But you can send it to our committee seal, that's CEAL at dccouncil.gov. All right. Want to make sure. And I can give you our time limit. It is, you have through November the 20th to submit your testimony in writing. And remember that if we're really examining existing law, if you would do your testimony, cite portions of the law that you're concerned about, that would be very helpful. All right. Now we will hear from our government witness, Director Unique Morris Hughes. Dr. Hughes, I can swear you in. All right. All right. Recognizing we're about 7 minutes before you must take a call. Oh, you're good? Okay. All right. All right. Okay. All right. The handlers have spoken. Okay. And if you have staff that will be joining you from the program, they can join you at the witness table. Okay. And what about your manager of the program?
Right behind you.
All right, well, would you join us at the table, please? Yes, yes, Mr. Sheik, join us at the table. You manage the program. Thank you. All right. Yes. I understand that, but there are no limits to whom we can ask questions of. And so I just want to make sure that, if you're here, we appreciate you being here. And of course, we will swear everyone in.
Well, I'll be the only person testifying, so.
We will swear everyone at the witness table in. I understand that you are providing the testimony, Ms. Director.
Right, there's
Okay.
one government executive witness today.
I understand that.
Okay,
Okay, but I can ask questions of any of the government employees in this government of the District of Columbia. All right, would you please raise your right hand? We'll swear you in. I understand your staff doesn't want
Okay.
to raise their right hand.
that's okay.
All right,
Go
this is our government. This is not something else. Okay, do you swear and affirm that your testimony and any statements that you make before us today to be truthful and complete?
Yes,
Thank you very much.
yes,
And please begin when you're ready.
sure. Actually, why don't I go ahead and submit my testimony for the record? So we can make the best use of the time that we have today, and then we can jump right into whatever questions you may have.
To get your testimony on the record present your testimony if you have written testimony.
Sure.
I don't think we have anything from you, but whatever you want to present.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So
Thank
good
you.
morning, Chairperson Bonds, council members, and staff of the Committee on the Executive Administration and Labor. I'm Dr. Unique Morris Hughes, Director of the Department of Employment Services. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the work of our Office of First Source Compliance. Our mission at DOES is to connect district residents, job seekers, and employers to opportunities and resources that empower fair and safe and effective working communities. The program we are discussing today today advances the mission. My testimony will provide a brief overview of the program, and I look forward to discussing it in depth. Today, we are discussing the district's First Source program. The Office of First Source Compliance, housed within the Office of Wage and Hour. Wage and Hour also includes our occupational health and safety team and is responsible for the enforcement of DC labor laws and requirements. First Source program has been in effect since 1984 to ensure that projects developed with the District of Columbia funds or resources give priority to district residents for new jobs created by municipal financing and development programs. As the district's workforce agency, DOES ensures compliance by monitoring First Source statutory hiring or hours worked requirements for all district government assisted projects or contracts valued at $300,000 or more. This program has been integral to the district's strategy to reduce unemployment. Our Office of Talent and Client Services works in partnerships with the Office of First Source to support employers and employees in filling First Source positions by matching district residents with job opportunities. Between July 1, 2022 and December 31st, 2022, 1,131 positions were created on First Source projects and contracts, with 594 of those being filled by district residents. As I've mentioned in a previous roundtable, we understand that the construction industry is very competitive and that there's often a large demand for skills that only a limited number of individuals possess, which can sometimes make First Source requirements a challenge. To address this challenge, the Office of First Source Compliance has developed a robust program around alternative plans. When employers have difficulty meeting First Source requirements based on a lack of district residents in a particular trade, the office will work with them to develop an alternative plan. Through the alternative plans, employers will enter into a special workforce development training or placement arrangements with the agency. The First Source requirements are important, robust levers to economic development in the district. While DOES is committed to holding employers accountable to the First Source requirements, that commitment includes partnering with them to ensure that we build a district workforce ready to fill the jobs created by First Source projects. I will also note that while we consider alternative plans to be a valuable part of the First Source program, we are currently utilizing alternative plans in less than 6% of our First Source agreements. Alternative plans can be mutually beneficial, but we make every effort to ensure that district residents are being placed into jobs first, and alternative plans are only utilized when the need is demonstrably evident. Thank you again, Councilmember Bonds, for the opportunity to discuss this program with you today. With that, I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Wanted to make sure that we understand how our government values the alternative plan. So your testimony covered
Thank
that.
you. And I thought it was submitted to you prior to today, so I will make sure that it wasn't. I'll make sure that you have a written copy,
Okay.
and going forward, you'll have
All right.
drafts before.
That's why we wanted it on the record, because we really don't
That's
have
fine.
anything.
I did
here.
not realize that.
We're a fast-moving government. No issue here. Can you please explain the First Source process from the perspective of the employer? How do they use it, in your opinion, and what you have seen?
Sure. So from the perspective of the employer, they probably view it as a compliance requirement. I think we should look at the First Source law at the 50,000 foot level first and foremost. The spirit of the law is to create an opportunity for DC residents to be employed on government funded or assisted contracts. That's the spirit of the law. And so I'm sure employers review that as a requirement. And as part of the compliance requirement, after they have completed a successful competition for a contract with a district government agency, most of these contracts are through the Office of Contract and Procurement, except for independent agencies that have independent contracting authority. Once the competitive procurement process is wrapped up, a First Source agreement is completed. And like we said, the majority of the time, the First Source plan and agreement is based off of the requirements in the law. On some limited occasions, and I think in my testimony, I said 6% of over 1,100 First Source active agreements we have right now are alternative plans. And what an alternative plan is, based on a review of labor market data, we do a scan of occupation and industry to determine if there's enough skilled labor in a particular occupation. We look at the number of DC residents that are unemployed or have registered in DC networks. We look at labor market data in the region, and we make a determination, is the supply able to meet the demand? And if the supply is not able to meet the demand, we will work with a company to develop an alternative First Source plan, which basically substitutes compliance.
Thank you very much. I think you hit the nail on the head, quite honestly, if I can be candid. You know, that is the point I was trying to make earlier, that we have these laws, these regulations, and how do we, as you say, how does the private sector become compliant when there is DC dollars involved in a project? And I think we have to examine this process a little further. And I certainly appreciate our public witnesses because they too hit the nail on the head in explaining what really happens in the local economy that they must live in. And so we could almost end this discussion right now, but we will not end it just because
Sure.
there are more questions to put on the table.
And if I can, you know,
Mhm.
I had an opportunity to hear all of the testimony this morning, and I think there's some areas that we need to clear up. And so I can wait until you ask me, or I can offer what I've observed in areas that I think need further clarification. You let me know how you'd like to proceed.
I think it would be very important for us to hear what you heard.
Okay.
So please proceed.
Yes.
Mhm.
Well, what I heard today, what I would call very from all of the witnesses that testified, very critical and important observations on the first source process. I also heard some intertwining of processes in DSLBD with CBEs and first source. And so I think that's the first place that I'd like to spend a little bit of time with. The Department of Employment Services implementation of the first source law it really is focused on getting unemployed individuals opportunities into jobs. The Department of Employment Services is not part of the contracting process. We have no insight or documentation going into the development of a first source plan. Our first source plan, that process is not part of the competitive procurement process. So there has to be a clear distinction with what our role is and what DSLBD's role is and the CBE process. I think that's the first important distinction. What I also heard is that, you know, I think there may be a bit of misunderstanding with, and I want to make sure I'm right, and I know we have a meeting scheduled, but I think we have some of our CBEs that are self-employed. And when not working on a project, they may also be unemployed individuals as well. And I want the folks in the audience and those that are watching remotely to know that you can register through DC Networks, which is our record of system at the Department of Employment Services, if you are an unemployed individual looking for work. When we make determinations of skilled labor supply, when we're making an analysis on the demand, we look in DC Networks, in addition to all the other labor market tools that we have available and labor market data in the region. So if you're self-employed and unemployed at the time, you should be registering for DC Networks so we can track you. Because if you're not working, if you so choose to work on a project as a unemployed person, we can find you on the rolls. But we don't capture and track individual CBE businesses because our focus is finding unemployed individuals opportunities for work. And so I heard some discussion of CBE, but I also think there's some self-employed, unemployed discussion that's taking place at the same time as well.
Yes, I heard that too. And I think we need to be at the drawing board to unravel some of these programs that we have in place so that they really are working for the populations as it was intended. You know, I always spend a little time thinking about the laws that we enact, and they may be perfect to, I guess, solve a problem that's before us. But, 10 to 1, there's a little unintended consequences that tends to be kicked up at some point. And I think it has to do with the times. There was a time when the district was fleshed with individuals who wanted to learn a trade, wanted to get into these occupations. Okay, so some were able to do that. And now they're saying, this is what I'm hearing. They're saying, we're here, we're organized, and we can do these jobs. But when we bid, maybe their bonding authority is not as high as someone who has been established long-term. And so therefore they're not selected. Doesn't mean that they don't have the skill set. So we got to figure out how can that group of enterprises, small enterprises, be better utilized in our economy, because money that goes to Rockville or to Illinois, it's gone. It's out of our community. But money that goes to a Southeast or Northwest resident and a resident company, we can utilize that here. We know that it may very well sift through the community. And so that is where I am. That's my concern.
You know, and the examples that I've heard so far, which I think are really important and real examples, the procurement package, that competitive bid package is put together before DOES sees it. So if the agency selects, a vendor and subs, we have no influence over the selection of subs. But what we do is hold the sub and the prime accountable for meeting first source requirements. It is a reality based on the data that we have that there is not a large number of people that are entering the skilled labor market. And so I have a really unique challenge as the person who oversees the Department of Employment Services, which is to help those who are in skilled labor get connected to employment opportunities, hold our primes and subs accountable for hiring DC residents, and then also build the talent pool. So then that way we have a future talent pipeline of people who are interested in the skilled trades. Now, what the alternative plans have afforded us an opportunity to do is to build the pipeline through apprenticeship, through training programs. I have talked about in other venues before that we have a generation of young people who haven't been exposed to opportunities in the trades. We have a generation of young people who are leaving high school that could very well be successful in the trades, but they've been redirected somewhere else. And so I'm trying to build a talent pipeline and get people skilled so they can meet the demand of the workforce.
All right, so please help me understand this requirement of 20% journeyman, and then what is it, 50%? The other, I'm sorry, I have to get my numbers, 60% apprenticeship hour. Don't you see that as being a point of collision in trying, if you're a company and trying to be compliant, would you not take the 60% apprenticeship hours? Because that's sort of like you begin. I mean, as we have heard this morning, you get to do the uncomplicated labor type jobs, pushing the broom, cleaning up. You put in your 10 hours and you're moving forward.
Yeah, so
isn't that more desirable from a financial perspective for a company to be compliant there than to be concerned with the journeyman work hours?
yes, but it's not either or.
I understand that, but I'm just saying from what I'm hearing, in order to be compliant with first source, the alternative plan almost eliminates the journey work hours because it is a stipulation that you do not have skilled labor in the marketplace. So therefore, this new plan says, well, you're going to have apprentice opportunities, or you're going to create apprentice opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, that is a very real possibility. But the reality is we don't have the number of journey workers that are DC residents to meet the demand of the labor market.
All right, and okay, let's just talk about that. You know, I was here in 1984. I was on the other side of the government then. I was on the side that was operating programs, and was here when we created this program. And the goal was to give DC residents an opportunity to establish, you know, their trade, to be bona fide enterprises that could be selected for the various government contracts. 1984, and we're almost at 2024.
Mhm.
And I remember Mr. Greenhill's dad, you know, okay, and I'm saying, so what can Mr. Greenhill expect that this time has passed, these decades have passed, and he's still fighting for an opportunity to prove that he's part of a company that can win a contract? I know you are not in that. That's not your business. That's another agency. But he comes to the table thinking that, okay, I'm qualified, and then he's not selected. But you're saying, well, your alternative, Mr. Greenhill, is that you are an electrical contractor or individual with that skill set. So you sign up with me and I'll make sure that you can have an opportunity for a job. I'm just saying, will the small business community, particularly, I'll just use a phrase my colleagues frequently use, the Black and the Browns, will ever have an opportunity to be more than just individualized on a job? Can they ever be an enterprise that we respond to? And do you see the need for that in modern DC?
Yeah. So that's
I'm putting you on the spot, and I know it.
You are putting, so I think there's a few things can be true at the same time, right? I mean, you know that I don't oversee DSLBD
I do.
or CBEs. Should there be an opportunity for CBEs to not just compete, but to successfully win bids on projects? Of course. I think that's a value that we have in district government. Of course, the answer is yes. Should unemployed individuals that have skills that are needed to work on these projects get an opportunity for, or be hired and earn, you know, the prevailing or top or highest wage? Of course. Yes, that's exactly what I believe, and that's what we strive to do in DC. I just want to not conflate with our process and what we do compared to what DSLBD does. And I will tell you, the alternative plans are helping us to build a skilled workforce. Where else can you go in the city and take a government sponsored or supported training or government coordinated training on any of the skilled laborers? What other agencies can you go to if you're not in high school? DOES, right? And so there's only really one opportunity that we have here. We have one bite at the apple to help build a brand new and additional, or build capacity and add new people to the workforce. And we're doing that through having training as a required component in many of these alternative plans. You've heard me talk about before elevator mechanics. I think there's less than 3, or maybe there might have only been 1 DC resident who is trained to and licensed to work on an elevators in the District of Columbia. Every building that I'm aware of, most buildings that are in DC have elevators. I'm trying to build an opportunity so we can have DC residents work on elevators in their own community.
Miss Dr. Hughes, it just so happens yesterday I had breakfast with a skilled individual who does and was pointing out to me the various elevators that he worked on in buildings in downtown DC. He's an elderly man because I was doing a program with DACL, but I encouraged him to talk with you to see if we can't set up a apprenticeship program of some sort. You know, he's not an individual contractor. He's just someone
Sure.
who served in our armed forces and has the skill set and has operated with companies to do this. So that may be a way for us to address this issue because so many buildings in DC have elevators and he's a Ward 8 resident. So
he might
I
be
just
the
had
one
to
we
tell
have
you that
registered.
because yes, of course,
Right?
of course.
And so I want DC residents to work and make family sustaining wages. At DOES, I do everything in my power, which means holding vendors and businesses accountable. And I know, I mean, we heard that the compliance is difficult. So I know I'm not necessarily making it easy for everyone. I just want to make sure that we don't conflate the issues at play. Are they cousins and related to each other? Perhaps, but I just want to make sure we don't conflate the issues.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's not the purpose of today's hearing. Today's hearing is to understand how the First Source program works. And I think we've heard a good amount of how it works, at least from the employer's thinking. And of course, you answer some of the other questions. But today is not to, this is not an indictment of the CBE program or the First Source program, but it is to look more closely at how the First Source program works or does not work, because it clearly does not work for an existing local small business. It's unless they win a contract.
Well, but the First Source law wasn't developed for small businesses.
Correct. That's the point. That's the point. That's the point. That's where we
Yes.
are. But many in the contracting world think that it is. And that's what we're trying to clear up. And so I think we can agree that we may need a program for the small business person that comes through even the training programs that you generate at DOES, and how do they now get to the point where they can have a job?
Mhm.
They can bid in the regular process, but if they don't have the bonding capacity, that's another issue. I'm aware of that. So maybe we need some sort of set aside. Maybe we need set aside with some bonding assistance. You know, we talk about how do we help the residents of the District of Columbia live in this new era, post-COVID, where things are quite different and many have lost the opportunity to use the trade that they had, or it's diminished, work is diminished. So maybe we need to put some resources in that bucket. We have resources in other buckets. It's about saving all of our residents and not just one particular group. And I know it's really hard in your buckets. I know you got a lot going on.
Yeah, I did want to also address, apprenticeship. We are very fortunate in the District of Columbia to have minority led and centered and focused apprenticeship program. For many that are familiar with apprenticeships, there are places in this country where apprenticeships were passed down through families. You didn't have access as a person of color to apprenticeship. And apprenticeship gives people an opportunity to work full-time as an employee with benefits and learn on the job. So sometimes as part of that learning, you start at entry level. So before, and it's something that we speak with our participants and especially young people. You don't necessarily go right in at the top. You start entry level, which means you might be doing some of the general labor work at the beginning. You might have 4 or 6 months of general labor work at the beginning before moving up and beginning to learn more complicated skills. And so I just want to make sure that I put a finer point on that, because we have worked really, really, really hard over the last 5 years to create Apprenticeship DC, which, now we have gotten into the non-traditional apprenticeships, and Monday we'll have an announcement about the HBCU apprenticeship public service program, which we will run. But it's important though that, we prop up and we highlight it, because for many, many years, 20, 30 years, people of color did not have access to apprenticeships. And so I don't want to somehow devalue what we are doing with apprenticeships.
Thank you very much for that. Neither do I. And that isn't the point. The point is quite different. I was making a different point when I made my comments, but I thank you very much for that. How many new district residents typically hired when, excuse me, per $1 million of contract value?
New district residents per $1 million?
Yeah.
So
Typically, yeah.
what? Okay, well, let me tell you what I can answer, because I have over 1,000 active first source agreements that 7 people are managing. What I can share with you is that during FY23, we had 1,247 DC residents hired out of 916 first source agreements that were executed. That's in FY23.
916 agreements, and how many were hired?
DC residents, 1,247. So 52% of the people who were hired were DC residents.
Okay. But you do not, excuse me, look at it from a dollar value.
No.
I see.
No.
Do you collect that data? Surely you must.
It's not broken down per $1 million. We have probably the total amount of government assisted projects, the total number of people hired,
Okay.
non-resident versus resident.
All right. So how many, what are the value of the contracts for the same time period of 23?
You don't have that. So we'll have to follow up with you with the total amount of government assisted projects that have first source agreements.
Yeah, and
the
you
value.
can break it down into 2 buckets. The amount of the government dollars and the amount of the total value of the project.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. And we can do the math.
Yes.
If
No,
we
I
can
mean,
get those numbers, we can
yes.
do the math.
Okay. We'll provide you an update.
Okay,
with
that will help us to understand the outstanding value of the alternative work plans too.
Well, I don't think you're gonna get, I'm not sure you'll get the number. I'm not sure you'll get the value of the alternative work plans by that number.
Well, we can do approximate because we won't have a list. We don't, unless you provide us with a list of, for FY 23,
Mhm.
the number of alternative work plans and the value of those alternative work plans in the two buckets, that was government assisted, and then the total value of the project or the contract. We might be able to come up with a sense of that. And that's in your total, out of your totals,
So we can provide the list.
number of, yeah,
We'll provide the list of alternative plans. We'll provide our estimated value of the alternative plans. And I think I get what you're saying here, but we're only monitoring projects that have that are government assisted. So I don't think we have other projects that. we're
I
monitoring
see. So
non-government.
you would not necessarily have the value. Let's say I'm doing a $50 million project and government assisted is 20 million within that. You would not know if I came to the table. I would only have to talk to you about the 20 million.
Correct.
Not, okay.
Yes.
All right, well, just give me then the government assisted,
Yes,
okay,
we'll do
amount. Okay, that would be very helpful.
yes.
Okay. Very, very helpful. Thank you. DOES is required to submit semi-annual first source reports to the council. When was the most recent report submitted?
22, fiscal year 22, Q1. So, and fiscal year 22 is when the last report was submitted.
And how do you look at semi-annual reporting? Are you thinking calendar or are you thinking the FY semi-annual, 6 months? What
So
is that 6 months deadline?
calendar, and then I think we must have 100 council mandated reports, but I think we may have 6 months to submit the report. So there'll always be a 6-month lag time. So if we have 6 months to submit it's submitted 6 months
Okay.
after, the first half of the year, there'll always be a lag time.
All
I
right, so
believe-
then may I ask, please, can I get the reports for calendar year 22? They should be
Yes,
available to me
22,
now.
yes.
And may I also ask that I get a copy of any reports that were submitted in 22 or 20 calendar year 22, 23, that you said that the council has about 100 different reports it requires from your office. And we will take those 100 reports that are required that
Okay.
you said.
So
I don't
I
have them.
believe that the committee has a list of the reports.
So it's not 100, I'm sure.
Well, I mean,
Yeah, I know.
I'm
Yeah.
being
Yeah,
flippant here.
I understand.
I'm being flippant.
Okay.
It feels like 100
Okay.
people at least working on them, but there are 22 reports that are council mandated.
Okay.
And so I believe the committee has a list of all of the reports. Are you asking us to provide to the committee a list of the reports?
I am asking you to provide to me a copy of those reports for last year. You're counting it calendar year, so it would be for 22, right?
So yes, the first source
That's what you
reports.
said.
So we will provide for you the 22 calendar year 22 first source reports. And I'm not sure that first semi-annual report for FY 23 is done yet, but when it is, we will submit to the committee.
I understand that, and I thank you very much for that, but you also said that there were 100 different reports that the council has burdened the agency with providing to the council. I am asking, can I get a copy of whatever that conglomerate of
Yes.
reports?
So I will make
Okay.
sure my team, so 100, I was being flippant, but I probably have 100 FTEs working on 22 council mandated reports. We will
Yes.
provide to the committee the reports that we have
Okay,
available.
thank
Then if
you.
there's something else, you let us know.
Okay, all right, okay.
Thank you.
So I want for the record, it is not 100 different reports.
No.
It's only 22 that we're speaking of.
But
And
I would love to work with your office on maybe reducing the number of reports and having whatever is a priority for the committee.
that is my intention. So, I
Perfect.
mean, we have so many reports issued throughout this government that are on shelves. I can show you some are very attractive, covers and all, but
I
I
believe
don't
it.
know the extent of, yes. Thank you very much for that. Can you just walk us through how DC residents get added to the First Source registry?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay.
DC residents should go to www.does.dc.gov. They can click a link to sign up for DC networks. They should complete all of the necessary steps in DC networks, which is essentially building a profile, providing all of your contact information, your resume, and saving that in DC networks. You would also mark that you're unemployed. That will be a flag for us, so we know that you are looking for employment. If there is a DC resident that does not have a resume, they're welcome to walk into any of our American Job Centers to get support to create a resume for which they could use to then upload in DC networks. They could also come on site to sign up for DC networks as well.
All right. And so could we get information that would inform us as to the number of registrations you had in well, where now? I guess in FY 22. Well, no, I guess you say you do yours by calendar year. So what I'm trying to do is to come up with the number of, to understand the number of registrations that you had in, I guess, calendar year 22. And can I get that information, the registrations by ward?
Yes,
Okay, that would be very helpful.
yes. We'll provide you the number of
Okay.
people who have registered in DC network by ward.
And if, for instance, any one month, the registration sort of jumped, was higher than other, sort of outstanding, if there's some anomaly that shows up in the data, it would be helpful to understand that.
Okay, we'll also provide to you, which is on our website right now, our workforce economic report, which is called Talent Forward DC.
Mhm.
That probably has, lots of different data points
It does.
that I think would answer some of the questions that you may have.
Yes, well, you see, your shop, your agency is our point of labor standards and documentation. And so I'm trying to segment out what seems to be of concern as it relates to this particular issue. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, in the Talent Forward DC report that we put up annually, the data is disaggregated by ward, race, gender, age, occupation. We publish it every year annually. So 22.
Yeah.
22 is on the website now. So let's forward it to their
Okay.
office.
So we can look for electricians, we can look for carpentry, some of the building trades.
There is some information on occupations, not every single
Okay.
occupation, but there is some
Okay.
information on occupations. So if you want specific building trade And I can take a stab at what some of those occupations or labor categories would be. We can provide that information, but let's also, once you take a look at the talent forward report, I think whatever gaps you see that's not there, we can provide
All right.
for you.
Thank you. Thank you very
Mhm.
much. So I'm on the register. I'm looking for a job. I've said I'm a carpenter. So how does DOES determine whether or not I'm going to get an interview and therefore have an opportunity for a job? What's the rudiments that I have to go through?
So if an employer reaches out to us and says, I'm looking for 50 carpenters to interview, we will send an email to everyone who has indicated they have an interest or previous background.
They're on your list, right?
They're registered in DC Network.
Okay.
So we have a way electronically of searching. I'm going to, for lack of better words, I'm going to say database, but searching a database of people who have registered in DC Networks based on their occupational interest or experience. And then we can send a mass email saying, hey, we have an employer who is looking to interview 50 carpenters. Respond to this email if you're interested in coming in for an interview.
Okay, great. I responded. What happens? I'm coming in. You interview me. What does the interview entail? I mean,
so a job interview could entail many different things. And so I will generalize it. But an interview includes.
do I bring my resume with me or do you already have that?
Was a best practice, you should provide a resume. You should be a DC resident that's coming in to a job fair or for an interview that DOES has coordinated. You should be prepared by dressing appropriately for the job interview, bringing in a resume, being earlier on time, and being prepared to respond to questions completely and fully. During the interview, you could be asked your name, your experience, asked specific scenarios like any job interview, and then the employer makes a decision about hiring. DOES does not make any decisions about hiring.
Would you repeat that what DOES does not?
DOES does not make any decisions about hiring. Our job is to be a bit of a convener and bring both employers and skilled labor or unemployed residents to the table together, where hopefully a meaningful match occurs.
And sometimes the employer may be a DC government agency or office.
Could be, yes.
Okay,
Could
as
be.
well as the private sector.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. How many first source agreements is the agency currently monitoring?
We're currently monitoring, I said we have over 1,000, but it looks like 998. So I was off by 2.
Okay, you're currently monitoring 998. Okay, and what does that monitoring mean? What goes into monitoring it?
So monitoring is reviewing data that's submitted to us from subs and the prime about hiring compliance. It's site visits, site visits that it could include going onto site, speaking to hiring managers, observing interactions in the in the workplace and on the ground, communicating with vendors or businesses about their first source agreement. So that's essentially what monitoring is.
Okay, so who does the site visits? The Office of
First
First
source
source,
compliance.
how many compliance officers do you have in there?
7.
Okay, 7 officers. And are they visiting every day or is there a schedule that they follow?
So they themselves have their own tracking documents that they use to manage their portfolio of, projects that they're monitoring. Now, I'm going to assume the obvious, should not probably assume the obvious, but we have construction and non-construction. So a non-construction project may not need an on-site visit. I just want to make sure that I'm clear about that. But for our construction project compliance specialists, they could go on site, speak with the hiring managers, speak to the DC residents that are working.
So you're saying the construction sites may not need a compliance? Non-construction. Okay, that's what I was
Right. If
making
you're
sure.
building an IT system,
Right.
we don't necessarily
Okay,
need to go.
I see. Okay, all right. Okay. So your compliance officer sets his or her schedule.
Mhm.
And what are they looking for? How is the schedule set? That's what I'm trying to understand.
How is the schedule set?
Yeah,
for
what are
monitoring?
the concerns that they have? What are they supposed to check for?
So, okay, so the first part of this is desktop monitoring. It's a review of documentation that's been submitted. That's the first step. The second is if they go on site, they're observing interaction. They're talking to the hiring manager. They're asking, do you have DC, DC residents? We want to check in, ask them how they're doing. I mean, there is a set of protocol or monitoring practices. The schedule is set based on project completion and initiation of the first source agreement. So some of these first source agreements are a year. Some of them are multi-year. And so they probably are sequencing them out based on size of the project, length of the project, and value of the project.
So the written report that comes from the contractor, we're talking about construction contracts now. What does it contain that would be information that the compliance officer must follow up on?
So on construction projects, they may be submitting certified payroll, and as part of desktop monitoring, documentation monitoring, they're checking the payroll documents. They're making sure there's no anomalies. If there is an anomaly, that might be a good opportunity at an in-person visit to bring up said anomaly. But that's the sort of documentation that they're looking at. It's very straightforward for us. Do you have the number of DC residents that you said that you would hire? And are they meeting the categories that you're required to be compliant in, which is the journey worker, 20% journey workers, 60% apprentices, 51% skilled labor, and 70% common labor. So our compliance checklist is relatively brief.
Okay, but the numbers you just recited or the percentages are hours, not individuals.
Correct.
So
Hours
how
per
do you test compliance for that when it's hours? Because your 7 compliance officers are not going to be on a job 8 hours to see whether or not 20% are skilled journey.
So
okay,
the percentages that I listed off is hours worked percentage.
yes.
While we're doing the desktop monitoring and reviewing the certified payroll, that's how you can determine if the number of hours that they're required to work and report on have been worked.
I understand that, and I can see that. I'm just trying to understand the role of the compliance officer in first source review going to the work site when it's hours that they are looking at and not physical individuals on the work.
I mean,
I'm trying to understand.
It could be physical individuals on the work depending on the first source agreement that they have. It could be.
Okay.
And so we want to also make sure that we have DC residents working on the project, but it's important to me that the compliance specialists are in touch and that we have a face to the work that we're doing. So I actually encourage them to go out to the site, not just sit at your desk.
Okay. So therefore, in the course of a work week by your compliance officers, what percent of the work week would be at the desk?
Easily 50% of the work week. And maybe someone can do the quick math for me, but if you have 7 compliance specialists monitoring 998 projects, I would argue you're pretty busy. And so that 50% at least of the time you're at your desk.
Okay. So is 7 enough, adequate?
I think building capacity, which is something that we have tried to do, is going to be important for us as we enter, I think, the 40th year of the First Source Law.
So are there potentially, I know the answer, but I'll ask anyway, potentially individuals that have come through the DOES programs, the various apprenticeship programs that could become staffers in the First Source office? Would that be a good set of eyes
Oh, we've
think
hired
of?
people from Project Empowerment to be in the First Source office, and as part of work experience and some of our workforce programs, we have placed them in the First Source office to work. So we utilize all of our training programs to help us build capacity.
Okay. All right. So what is the penalty? That is the fine for employers who are not in compliance with First Source. I'm out there, I see something, I mark it down, I bring it back to my, Mr. King, you're the boss, I would guess, of First Source office. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right, bring it back to Mr. King. What's Mr. King gonna do with this information? And does he need to see it 3 times before he does something, or what?
So I think it's important to note that we make a determination of compliance when the project is done.
When it's done?
Yes,
Oh,
that's a requirement of the
so
law.
I could see multiple problems reported to you, you document, and 2-3 years later,
This
we
is
do
why the
something.
monitoring visits are important, because if we see people trending towards non-compliance, then we bring them in and we meet with them, or we go on site and we meet with them and we say, you're trending towards non-compliance. What are you going to do to ensure the project is brought into compliance? But we don't make a determination of compliance until the end of the project.
Thank you.
In terms of the penalty, Chairwoman Bonds, the law requires that the penalties are 1/8 of 1% of the total amount of the direct and indirect labor costs of the project, or contract for each percentage by which the beneficiary fails to meet.
So 1/8 of 1% of the,
Total amount of the direct and indirect labor costs of the project, or contract for each percentage by which the beneficiary fails to meet.
okay. Interesting. So how much money has DOES collected for penalties in FY22? And I guess these would be projects that maybe started in 2018.
So I have the 23 number. I don't have the 22 number in front
Okay.
of me, but $1,043,967.13 was collected in FY 23. And then we collected our first fine in 2017. So this is still relatively new for the agency, and it was a pretty big deal when we started collecting fines, but it's a compliance lever that we pull when we find people to be non-compliant.
And so how much has been collected to date
2 million,
in total?
$2,024,912.35.
All right. And so what happens to this money that you collect? Does it go into the general fund?
No, it goes into the Jobs Trust Fund. And
Jobs Trust Fund.
it goes into the Jobs Trust Fund. And I actually think we may have 1 or 2 compliance specialists that are funded from the Jobs Trust Fund. And the rest we have used for workforce training programs to help build capacity and skilled labor.
Can I get a breakdown of how that money has been used? This total 2.24912.35 has been used since 2017.
Yes.
Please, thank you. I understand that in your visits, your compliance visits, you might find that, as you said, that a company is trending up out of compliance.
Towards non-compliance.
Yes, I said out of,
Yeah.
out of compliance.
Yes.
So, and then at that point, you make arrangements. What kind of arrangements do you make to help them become compliant?
Well, we don't always make arrangements because the idea is that people create their own plan to be in compliance. So that's not, we don't always make arrangements. There are a few exceptions or times where if we deem and determine, or if the business comes to us and, for whatever reasons and says, it looks like we're not going to be able to meet compliance, we can look at creating an alternative plan to help support them. But that doesn't happen regularly, but it could.
Okay, so with my original request about the alternative plans and how many and what have, can you also add to that chart the start date of the project to the best of your ability, and then the date when an alternative plan was put in place?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Is there a law or a regulation that governs the issuance of the alternative plans? A particular law that you follow other than there shall be, or there, I'm sorry, I think the word is there may be. I think it was Mr. Young that said it should be shall, but that currently says there may be alternative plans.
I mean, it is the first source law.
I-
But there's
I
not regulations.
But I mean, do you have any, well, surely you just don't say, well, we'll just do a work plan. I mean, you must have some guidance that you put in place, some practice that says you can have.
Yeah,
work
so, I mean, we have internal criteria that we look at when determining whether or not we want to implement a alternative plan for first source.
All right, can you share that with me, please?
Yes.
And okay,
we will
thank you.
share.
We really need to see that.
Yeah, we will share.
Thank you so much.
Mhm. We should also talk a little bit about good faith effort, which we've not talked about, which is
Okay.
a critical component of an alternative or first source plans altogether.
Right.
Before we even get to an alternative plan, the law requires that a good faith effort be made.
So there is
and
some
meeting-
stipulation in the law that can help you. Okay.
Thank you. Yes, so a good faith effort. We have a pretty good template and set of criteria that helps us to evaluate whether or not a good faith effort has been made. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples here, and I'm happy to share the document in our criteria,
Okay.
with you. One of them is, did the employer advertise each job opening in a publication or in media for at least 7 days? One example. Did the employer contact churches, unions, additional workforce development organizations? Did the employer interview employable candidates? How many candidates did they interview? Where did they post the jobs? Did the employer create or participate in a workforce development program approved or recognized by DOES? It can't be a Johnny-come-lately workforce development program that someone, creates in their spare time. It has to be something that's recognized by us, that oftentimes could lead to a nationally recognized credential. Let's see. Did they post the jobs, vacancies in DC networks? That is a criteria. So we have a pretty robust set of criteria for good faith effort before we even get to an alternative
Okay.
plan.
And can we get a copy of that, your good
Yes.
faith? Okay.
Yes, that's the criteria. But yes,
Okay,
we'll
thank
provide
you.
that.
Because I think it would be very helpful if we also added to it outreach to the registered CBE community, and that registration should be contained at the Department of Small Local Business Development. And we should have a time frame on that. Maybe that will get to that other part that you mentioned, trying to get the CBEs that are not employed, giving them an opportunity to
And
get
I
in
mean, and
there.
perhaps there's some discussion to be had with, DSLBD and OCP about, providing a list of CBEs that are available and ready to go and that are competitive. At DOES, we're happy to help in any ways possible, but I think the two major players of those conversations aren't at the table.
Of
right now.
course, I agree with you 100%. And I hope that the contracting community understands that you do your part, but there are a couple of missing parts before they even, be
Yes.
concerned about what
Sure.
you do, that they need to be concerned with as well.
Yes.
That's what this is about.
Yes.
Getting there, getting there.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Can you explain how the Office of Talent and Client Services and the Office of First Source work together to ensure that employers have the opportunity to hire qualified district residents? Because now I'm on this list, I'm on your talent list. And what's going to happen to me? I've had my interview and what have you.
Sure. So the Office of Talent and Client Services is essentially a recruiting arm in the agency. They work with employers to source candidates and talent. We actually have a coordination meeting that takes place bi-weekly, every 2 weeks, that even I participate in, where we talk about job leads and opportunities and ways to partner or strategically connect. But what the Office of Talent and Client Services is that they work directly with employers and candidates that are unemployed to make a meaningful connection for employment.
All right. In your current registry, can you also tell us current being as of 2020, you may have data that's current to 2023. Am I correct? Well, FY23. I'm still trying to wrestle with the calendar versus the FY. but if whatever your current information is, if you could describe it, indicating whether it's calendar information or FY, the number of journey workers, apprentice, skilled laborers, and then common laborers. That would be very helpful.
Let me see if I have that. Do you have that level of detail? Okay, we'll have to follow up with you
All right.
for the
Okay.
total, those total numbers in the registry, what we're reporting. Is that
All right.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
What are the hardest to fill jobs created by first source agreements in your, what you've seen from your office? I don't know.
Yes.
And I hope Mr. King has conveyed that to you. And I saw his eyes saying, it's on the tip of his
Don't
tongue.
worry, we have our language. We can talk here without words.
I'm trying to help you so you don't have to testify so that your director is not concerned, okay? I'm trying to be compliant, but you all
Thank
have to
you.
be compliant too,
I
okay?
appreciate it.
All right.
Okay, so our most challenging trades that we see to hire includes elevator, like I've talked about before, but hopefully that will change.
Yes.
Iron worker, glazing, rough carpentry, roofer, and cast in place concrete.
Iron worker, concrete.
Iron worker, glazing,
Mm-hmm.
rough carpentry,
Wow.
roofer, and cast in place concrete. Those are our challenges that we're seeing right now.
And I'm not familiar enough with the programs, the training programs that we have. But do we have training programs that address these critical construction jobs?
So with the Jobs Trust Fund, we plan on putting out a grant to create a training program for the elevator, the elevator program that I keep talking about because this is critical for us. And as we build the Jobs Trust Fund, we'll put out more grants trying to get organizations or unions to help support the creation of training programs in these areas. Right now, we do not have training
Okay.
programs in the city for them.
And what is the level of resources in the Job Trust Fund?
So we collected, I think I just said.
Yeah, you said over since 2017, 2.4 million.
Yes, but I think right now we have. Yes. So we collected like I said, $1,043,967.13 in FY 23. I think once you back out of the PS that is currently charged to that, I think we have probably somewhere just north of $500,000 in the trust fund. So as we collect fines and issue fines and penalties, then we build the trust fund and we use that funding to support training programs or FTEs.
So that fund is not exclusive to, I'll call it, the earnings that are attributed to the fines that are paid. Am I correct?
No, that fund has the fines and penalties that are paid.
Right,
That's the
exactly.
OTYPE fund.
Yeah, well, I was asking the other way. Okay, so there could be a budget allocation to that fund.
Yes. Yes,
All
yes, it could.
I can ask that way without saying. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
You know where.
Yes, it
Okay.
could.
All
I
right.
do.
We have codes in the government in order to get to where we
we
need to go.
Yes, you got there. I picked up what you put down.
All righty.
Yes. But
Wonderful.
you see here what I'm saying about and I'm serious. I hope that we can connect with the gentleman who's interested in the elevator training.
I'll give you his
program.
information. Yeah.
But I really want, I want to build a talent pool of Black and Brown residents to work in these trades. And so we are trying in every way possible with the resources that we have and such a small team for such a large number of first source agreements to build these programs. But next on the list is iron worker, glazing, rough carpentry, roofer, and cast and place. I'd also like to see on the list too, plumbing as well. I think electrical work is also important as well. But, you know, there's some opportunity here, Chairwoman.
All right, I hear you loud and there are some contractors in our community who are in our community, even though their payments go out of the community, but they're in our community doing various jobs. And I think we have to be a little more strident with them. You know, so we'll see how we can work with them in order to get what we need, but we need to do it quickly.
I mean, there might be an opportunity too, as we put these grants out, to have them apply for these grants to become instructors and
That's
teach.
right.
I mean,
That's
we
right.
don't control the DSLBD and contracting side of it,
Right.
but on the grant side, they certainly, you know, the criteria could apply and become instructors to help teach people in the community to do this work.
Let me ask you, I know we're not talking about the infrastructure academy, but do we need a construction trades academy, so to speak? Would you be open to such a opportunity?
I'm a glutton for punishment. I am open to training and DOES providing and supporting training in those areas. Yes. I do want to remind everyone that we do have the University of the District of Columbia and the community college. And so there'll be, you know, there's opportunities there as well to partner. But DOES could stand up training, you know, relatively quickly, most pretty quickly, to support training in those industries and fields.
And a construction trades academy could be located at the university.
Yes.
In fact, I would think that each of the universities, the private universities that are in our city, would do themselves well, since they do not pay taxes, if they could have an institute on their campuses, along with the resources that are needed to do various apprenticeship programming for us. And I think we have to move in that direction. I think we're at a point we have to speed up whatever it is that we're doing to make our community whole. And so that's, you know, so you have to be a partner in this. So I just like to throw it out and see whether or not it makes sense
Understood.
in your.
And we do have the infrastructure at the Infrastructure Academy to facilitate training. And we've been very successful at public-private partnerships there. And so I'm happy to, you know, play a substantive role, even if it includes the provision of training. So we could talk more about, you know, what that could look like.
Okay. Well, I thank you very much for your comments today. I think you kind of answered this, but, you know, wanted to know, does the agency refer graduates of the workforce development programs to the First Source Registry, like for instance, the Infrastructure Academy, SYEP, local adult training programs? Are they referred to the First Source registry where they can be selected for jobs?
I would say everyone except for the MBSYEP program is in DC networks and probably gets bombarded by us with all the job fairs and postings that we have. SYP is a little different. You're not required to register in DC networks if you're in SYEP, but all of our other programs, you have to register in DC networks.
All right, can you just, I guess maybe do Alex, we want to make sure that we have a list of the follow-ups that we're going to get from you, please.
Okay, do you want to go through what the list is?
Yeah, please.
Yes, okay. All right, so let me back up, council member. Would it be better? to turn on the-
Yes, you have to turn on, yeah, now the
Alright,
red
okay.
light, you're on.
So you wanted the total amount of the government assisted contracts. And then you've added to that, that you also would like information about the start date of projects and the date when and if an alternative plan was put in place.
Correct.
Okay. You would like a breakdown of the Jobs Trust Fund penalty usage. You would
Yes.
like the number of registrations in FY 23 and FY 22 in DC networks broken down by ward, and then if there's any spike month by month or just
Correct.
any anomaly to know that as well. You would like the calendar year FY 22 year copies of reports. And then the director has also said that we will provide you the Talent Forward DC. We will also share our internal criteria for the alternative plans. We will share the good faith criteria sheet, and we will provide you the number of journey workers, apprentices, skilled workers, and common workers broken down from the registry.
And then
Yes.
why don't you send them the link on the website where we post our monthly labor market data outlook? There's information about industry and occupation monthly on there. We submit a report monthly.
Let
or
me
complete
ask you,
report monthly.
of that labor information, is that also shared with COG, or do they bring all of the jurisdictional stuff together to create what they create?
By way of Department of Labor's
Yes.
data, COG gets it. So
Okay.
every state or jurisdiction or state puts data together that every month and I think today the president just did his monthly jobless rate report. Every month the president puts
Yes,
out a
yes,
report.
that's
So
true.
our data in DC is used
Okay,
for
it's
that
a part of
report
that.
as in every state. So COG and everyone else gets a
Okay.
copy of it. It's part of the master labor market information data
Right,
set the Department
right.
of Labor has.
Okay, I just, being a part of COG, I'm just very curious when I see this data. And you said a couple of things that sort of tripped my thinking about what the region may say about the availability of Black and brown contractors may be accurate, but DC may stand out and have a different data set than
Yeah.
what is standard for the region. That's all
And I also talk about this all of the time. Last time I was here, I did a call, I had to break to do a call with the Secretary Slater of Virginia, Secretary Wu of Maryland. And I told them jokingly, but not jokingly, that I am preparing DC residents to be competitive for jobs
Yes,
in the
thank
region.
you.
They can live in DC, but why couldn't we bring money in from Maryland
That's
and
right,
Virginia?
That's right.
And perhaps we need the same strategy with our CBEs as well. Why couldn't we support, DC residents and them getting the money in Maryland, Virginia and coming back home to DC? And so it's a value we have here at DOES, and perhaps that's something we could share
right.
cross interagency.
Yeah, I think to track DC residents who are doing work in other parts of the region would be very helpful as well. But thank you very, very much for that. And thank you all for the work that you do
Thank you.
as well. All right, okay. Well, I want to thank everyone who participated in today's public roundtable. We've heard valuable information about some of the Department of Employment Services' most critical functions. If the public has any additional thoughts or would like to submit written testimony regarding the performance of the offices, please email it to seal@dc council.gov, and that's CEAL at dccouncil.gov. And of course, the hearing record will close in 10 days, which is Sunday, November the 20th at 5 p.m. The committee's next meeting will be a little later this afternoon. We will be reconvening our public roundtable on the tipped wage portal. And of course, it's administered by the Department of Employment Services. So we will see the director a little later today at 2:30 p.m. and want you to have a moment. Okay.
Thank you.
This concludes this hearing today. With that, the time is 11:47 a.m. on November 9th, 2023. And the meeting is adjourned. And again, thank you to everyone who participated today.
Thank you.
Thank you.